Alright, here we go, chapter 44. Alright, we're going to go over identifying hazardous material and guidelines for the material. EMTs Dawn and Randy arrive at the scene of a reported vehicle collision in which a car pulling an enclosed rental trailer overturned. Both car and trailer are on their sides. Police officer on the scene reports a liquid substance with a strong chemical smell is leaking from the trailer, and he believes it may be related to methamphetamine manufacturing. The driver has fled the scene, but an injured passenger remains in the vehicle. What kind of additional action should Dawn and Randy take?
Hazmat suits.
You ain't got no hazmat suit.
I'd say don't go near the meth.
Alright. Don't go near it. Stay away from it. Stay down, uphill, upwind. Uphill, upwind. And you want to go ahead and get the hazmat team on the way. Alright, what information should they report to dispatch regarding this scene?
Well, condition of the truck and how far it's spread.
Okay. What additional resources are needed to manage this scene? Hazmat team. Alright. More than 4 billion tons of hazardous material is shipped through the U.S. every year. These include explosives, gases, flammables, corrosives, and radioactive materials. You must be able to recognize indications of hazardous material emergencies. Most of these, they will have placards on them, alright? If it is the military hauling something, they do not have to have placards on anything, okay? So, you better hope somebody there can tell you what's inside. Alright? So what exactly is a hazardous material? Hazardous materials can asphyxiate, irritate, increase the risk of cancer, act as a nerve or liver poison, or cause a loss of coordination, seizures, or altered mental status. They can also cause skin irritation, burns, respiratory distress, nausea, vomiting, tingling, or numbness of the extremities, blurred vision. Alright? Hazardous material is any material that poses a threat or unreasonable risk to life, health, or property, if not properly controlled. The acronym TRACEM can be used to remember the types of damage that can be caused by hazardous materials. Thermal, radiological, asphyxiation, chemical, etiological, and mechanical. The amount of damage depends on the dose, concentration, route of exposure, and the amount of the time the patient was exposed. A placard is a four-sided diamond-shaped sign that designates hazardous material in transit on roadways. The placard contains important information that can aid you in determining the best course of action. Okay? The color of the placard also indicates what class of hazard is contained within. A legend that indicates whether the material is flammable, radioactive, explosive, poisonous, or is also commonly displayed. Often, a placard displays a 4-digit UN number. This is the United Nations identification number that can actually identify the type of material being carried. The NFPA 704 system identifies potential dangers with the use of background colors and numbers ranging from 0 to 4. The blue diamond is a gauge of health hazard, the red fire hazard, and the yellow reactivity hazard. The white diamond is used for symbols that indicate additional information such as radioactivity, oxidation, the need for protective equipment, and so on. Alright, this is what your little triangle looks like. Alright, this triangle, let's go to the next slide. Alright, it has a 1 in the blue, a 2 in the red, a 0 in the yellow. Okay? The white diamond is used for symbols that indicate additional information such as radioactivity, oxygen, yeah, what y'all said, and the need for protective equipment. Alright, so the health hazard is a 1. Fire hazard is a 2. The yellow, reactivity hazard, it was what, a 0? Okay, so it's not gonna react with anything. Shipping papers are required to be in the cab of a motor vehicle, in the possession of a train crew member in the engine or caboose, in a holder on the bridge of a water vessel, or in the aircraft pilot's possession. As of June 2015, OSHA's Hazard Communication Standard, or HCS, requires chemical manufacturers, shippers, or distributors to provide information regarding the hazard chemical or chemical compounds. This information is also provided in your safety data sheets, that MSDS that is kept in the book, in the truck. All trucks should have them. The least reliable way to determine the presence of hazardous materials at the scene of an accident is to use your senses. Okay? Some of the visual clues: smoking or self-igniting materials, extraordinary fire conditions, boiling or spattering of material, wavy or unusual colored vapors, characteristically colored vapor clouds, frost near a container leak, and unusual condition of the containers. Quickly scan the scene looking for signs of potential hazardous materials, such as signs restricting entry, storage tanks, or containers with placards. Many visual clues can indicate the probable presence of a hazardous material. The U.S. DOT Emergency Response Guidelines, the yellow section: if only the 4-digit UN number for hazardous materials is known, then the name of the chemical can be found there by matching it to the number. The blue section: this section lists hazardous materials by name in alphabetical order. You can cross-reference that by the UN number. Alright, orange section: both the yellow and blue sections provide information that references in the orange section. In the orange section, all hazardous materials listed in the emergency response guidebooks are grouped into one of 63 guide numbers, which provides information on the primary hazardous and emergency response action to be taken for each material. The orange section also provides information regarding PPE, evacuation distance, spill control procedures, fire control, and first aid measures. The green section within the blue and yellow section contain chemicals that are highlighted in green. This denotes that the chemical presents a specific hazard as a toxic industrial hazard when spilled. Alright, when contacting a resource, provide the following information: your name, your callback number, and a fax number, the nature and location of the product, your UN or the product's UN identification number, or the name of the product, name of the carrier, shipper, manufacturer, co-signee, and point of origin. Accidents involving hazardous material often occur at inconvenient locations, making communication difficult. It is crucial that you make every effort to keep the phone lines open. Stay in contact with people. Employers are responsible for determining and documenting the appropriate level of training for each employee. Because training addressed by OSHA usually has a fire service focus, the National Fire Protection Association has published Standard 473, which details the competencies for EMS personnel at hazardous material emergencies. Alright, training required by law. First responder awareness. This is the level usually required for EMTs. Alright, they're trained to recognize a problem, call for proper resources, and prevent others from entering the scene. First responder operations. This level of training is for those who initially respond to hazardous material emergencies and to protect people properly in the environment. They are trained in the use of special personalized protective equipment and help stop the emergency from spreading. Hazardous materials technician. This extensive level of training is for rescuers who actually plug, patch, or stop the release of the hazardous materials. Hazardous materials specialists. Rescuers with this training have advanced knowledge and skills. They provide command and support activities at the site of hazardous material emergencies. Alright, Never attempt a hazardous material rescue unless you have the specialized training and equipment. Always call for help. You want to locate yourself and bystanders uphill, upwind, upstream, and away from danger. One rule of hazardous material rescue is to avoid contact with any unidentified material, regardless of the level of protection offered from your clothing or equipment. At the first responder awareness level of training, your actions at a hazardous material incident should include the ability to recognize that a hazardous material incident has occurred. Avoid contact with the hazardous substance, isolate the area, and notify the appropriate authorities or response agencies. Okay? You can use this by knowing the acronym RAIN. Recognize, avoid, isolate, and notify. Decontamination is defined by OSHA as the removal of hazardous substances from exposed individuals to the extent necessary to prevent the occurrence of unforeseeable adverse harm. Incident management. This is kind of some of the stuff we talked about or y'all learned in NIMS. One command officer who is responsible for all rescue decisions should be appointed. All rescuers should be aware of who the officer in command is. There should be a clear chain of command from each rescuer to the commanding officer. There should be an established system of communication used throughout the emergency. The system should be one all rescuers are informed about, know how to use, and have access to. Receiving facilities should be pre-designated. Choose facilities that can handle large number of patients, have surgical capabilities, and if possible, have established decontamination procedures. Alright, establishment of a plan. Alright, when you get on scene, these people need to know as soon as possible the nature of the problem, identification of the hazardous material, type and condition of the containers, and the existing weather conditions. Smoke from hazardous material fires presents an environmental hazard. It carries toxins and particles of hazardous material through the air, widening the area of contamination. Unless you are a trained firefighter, do not attempt to extinguish a fire. As an early priority at the scene of any hazardous material emergency, safety zones are established in which rescue operations and specific sequences of decontamination procedures take place. Anyone in the warm and hot zones must have proper protective equipment. Gross decontamination is performed at the entry to the warm zone. Primary assessment is performed in the warm zone. Once life threats are addressed, complete decontamination is performed. The patient is assessed and major injuries are treated in the warm zone. Alright, here's a look at your zones. You got a cold zone where your ambulance is going to be parked. You have a warm or your control zone. Then you have the hot zone. Okay? Here's the 9-step decontamination procedure. Located in your book. In the cold zone, take vital signs and prepare the patient for transport. Protect the ambulance and equipment from contamination. Complete decontamination is required prior to air medical transport. If at all possible, do not put these people on a helicopter, okay? It's a whole lot easier to decontaminate an ambulance than it is to decontaminate a helicopter. The only work done in the hot zone is hazard assessment. Control the release of the hazard and rescue performed by trained personnel who are wearing the appropriate protective equipment. Initial or gross decontamination should be performed at the entry to the warm zone. Alright, radiation emergencies and exposure. The patient is in the presence of radioactive material without any of it touching their clothing or their body. The exposure can be harmful to the patient. The patient does not become radioactive. Okay? Alright, contamination. The patient has direct contact with the source of radioactivity. The radioactive material is present on the patient's skin or clothing. The patient is at risk to emergency personnel. A radiation safety officer, or an RSO, is an expert specifically trained under federal government provisions to handle such situations. Okay? You need to protect yourself and others from contamination. Do not attempt to decontaminate a radiated patient. And if possible, wait for this specialized officer. You can place the patient in a body bag up to the neck. Okay? Cover the hair with a cap or towel, wipe the face with disposable wipes, and place them in a plastic bag for disposal at the hospital. Alright? You don't want to put this in your ambulance. Alright? You're going to contaminate your ambulance too. Time is a critical factor in managing radiation emergencies. Trained personnel should remove the patient from the source of radiation as quickly as possible before you begin emergency care. You need to increase the distance between yourself and the source of the radiation. Limit your stay in a contaminated area to as little time as possible. Keep as far away from the sources as you can and involve as few rescuers as possible. Exposure to radiation is cumulative and is determined by an inverse square relationship. That is, if you are twice as close, you will receive 4 times the exposure. Alright, limit your stay to as little time as possible. Keep far away from the source as you can. Exposure to radiation is cumulative. Radiation sickness is caused by exposure to large amounts of radiation. Symptoms start from a few hours to days following exposure to the radiation, and depending on the dose, can last from a few days to 7 or 8 weeks. The amount of time between radiation exposure and the onset of symptoms is a relatively reliable indicator of how much exposure you have absorbed. A victim of radiation accident is not contagious or infectious and generally will not endanger a rescuer. You are at risk of becoming contaminated if the patient still has radiation particles on their skin or clothing. Radiation poisoning occurs when the patient has been exposed to dangerous amounts of internal radiation. The result is a host of serious diseases, including cancer and anemia. You can reduce your risk. The best way to approach is to divide the rescue work among many rescuers, with teams composed of as few rescuers as possible. The Federal Nuclear Regulatory Committee recommends that an individual in an emergency, while engaged in activities deemed necessary for the preservation of life, be exposed to no more than a one-time whole-body dose of 25 thingies. Alright. I think it's Roentgens. I'm not real sure. Another approach to reducing risk is to shield the radiation source. For example, the best protection against gamma rays. One type of radiation that is extremely dangerous is lead, preferably 1 to 2 inches thick. If lead is not available, any material that has a thick mass, such as bricks, concrete, or several feet of dirt, will also do. The production of methamphetamine, which is a stimulant, requires converting the active ingredient in cold decongestant medicine, pseudoephedrine, into another compound. Doing this requires reacting pseudoephedrine with several chemicals, and these chemicals are hazardous. Some of them can include lithium, sodium hydroxide, ammonia, and hydrochloric acid, anhydrous ammonia and hydrochloric acid. This can result in the production of toxic gases, including phosphine, which is an extremely toxic gas that poses an inhalation hazard even in small amounts. The threat of a terrorist attack has heightened the awareness of a need to better prepare EMS to respond to incidents involving terrorist weapons, including explosive nuclear devices, bioagents, and chemicals. Alright, Dawn and Randy ensure that they are parked uphill, upwind the trailer as they await the hazardous material team. Law enforcement closes off traffic in the area of the collision. Properly outfitted hazardous material personnel determined that the patient has not been in direct contact with the leaking material but was exposed to fumes. They decontaminate the patient and deliver him right on to Dawn and Randy, who are waiting in the cold zone. Hazardous material personnel contain the leak and prepare the cleanup site. Alright, anybody got any questions?